In this video, I am going to provide you with an example of what the door, the trim, and the floor trim would look like if you have one layer of flooring. And something like this can often be found in new construction, where we have a door, the door jamb, the trim, all looking good without any problems. But that's not going to be the case after a few years of adding additional flooring, and that might not seem like much of a problem when you're looking at this, where we have two additional layers of flooring on top of the original flooring, and the floor trim might have been moved. However, the door and the door trim would have been cut, or should I say, is often cut as you add additional layers of flooring. And that's all going to be fine and dandy until someone comes in and says, we've got to start removing some of this flooring to install the next layer of flooring. And that decision can arrive from a variety of different reasons. However, this is usually what you're going to end up with. And the floor trim is usually not going to be that big of a deal. However, the door jamb, and the door trim might be, as you can see here. And now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, and you have a pretty good idea why I'm making this video, let's go ahead and start with my first repair suggestion, and that will be to remove all of the affected trim so that it can either be replaced or lowered along with the door and the door jamb. However, before we do that, I want to make you aware that you could have some discoloration, damage, or even damage the finished wall when removing the trim. And of course, that would depend upon what was used either behind or around the trim, like caulking. And I myself have removed trim like this and ripped a large section of the paint off. And that can usually be avoided by running a razor knife around the perimeter here before removing any of the trim. So keep that in mind. The discoloration and damage could be a problem. However, that can usually be solved by installing larger trim. So let's just go ahead and install the trim here to give you an idea what it might look like before and after, because this could be a problem if we lower the door without refinishing the wall or installing a larger piece of trim. So all you're going to need to do here is get something like a Sawzall and cut around the perimeter of the door in between the jamb and the framing. And that will usually be all you need to do to remove a door. However, I would strongly suggest getting a flashlight and inspecting the area in between the door jamb and the wall framing, if you can, to make sure that nobody has installed any electrical wires in that area or something else that is going to add additional unnecessary repairs to your project. And after you have lowered the door, you can install your new door trim. And this is what I meant by installing larger trim that will cover the additional gap here and any damage or discoloring like we have here around the entire perimeter of the door and the floor. And along with this repair suggestion, I would also like to add that this is probably going to be the most expensive repair in all of my examples because you're removing and replacing all of the trim. However, if you do not like that idea, let's go ahead and leave the door where it originally was and try and fill the gaps below with some type of wood. And you can realistically use whatever you want in this area to fill it, because something like this is usually going to be out of the line of sight of most people who walk through your home. And my guess is it's rarely going to be noticed, even if you don't do that good of a job. So my first suggestion would be to cut a board something like this that would be even with the front of the jamb and even or flush with both sides of the jamb on each side. However, you can shove it as far back as you want. There's usually going to be a gap between the jamb and the framing. And I would suggest shoving it back. It doesn't have to be tight. Maybe about a 1/16 of an inch gap here is going to be fine. And you could even have a 1/16 of an inch gap at the top here that can be filled with some type of a sealant, adhesive, or caulking. And after you have the block positioned where you want it to be, mark the top of it with a pencil so that it can be shaped accordingly. Now, something else I need to point out is that working with a small piece of wood like this might not be safe to cut and shape, especially with a saw or table saw. So this idea right here can be replaced by using two pieces of lumber, something like this, and then using some type of a sealant or adhesive to fasten everything securely together. And for something like this, you might not even need any nails. However, if you do use any nails or screws, I would recommend pre-drilling the holes to avoid splitting the wood. And if you cut these blocks a little bit smaller, you can simply add some adhesive to the bottom or the top and the sides, and then install the blocks, and you can kind of squish them right in there and then let them dry. And if for whatever reason you have it sticking out a little bit, you might be able to fill any spots like that with some type of filler or spackle. However, I wouldn't suggest doing that until a few days later after everything is dried and these are no longer moving. And if both this piece and this piece are the same size, you might be able to install a piece of trim underneath everything, and then maybe fill the gap here with caulking or some type of a filler, or leave it alone if it looks fine to you. However, if these two boards are a different size, then you might need to cut a block separately for this and separately for this one here. Next up on the list would be leaving the original trim and then finding a piece that is close enough or exactly the same that can be used to fill this area here, along with a piece of trim that will fill the area underneath your floor trim. So this one right here would not involve removing anything and can be done by simply filling all of these areas with small pieces of wood that might need to be shaped to fit. However, if you don't like this idea, you can always install a filler piece and another piece of trim over that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So that's all we've done here, is added a different piece of trim to provide another type of detail that might look better than the one on the other side. And this usually needs to be shaped at the corner here. And that can be done by simply cutting a 22.5 or 45 degree angle. And even though it might not look super awesome, this is the way most trim installers do it. In our next example, we will install a wood block to provide another detail, something else to think about, and allow this piece of trim to butt into it instead of miter into the corner. And of course, you can always use a larger piece of trim or move it over to be flush or even with the door jamb. And in this example, I extended the other side a little bit to provide you with another detail. In the next example, I went ahead and brought it back a little bit and then made this a little smaller so that the lower trim could run through. And again, you could always stop this miter right here at the edge to provide you with another detail. And you might even be able to buy something pre-made with some type of a design in it, or even make these yourself depending upon your level of woodworking skills. And here's something else I've done before. I've shaped a block to fit over the damaged area and then filled all of the gaps with caulking. And again, since this is not a highly visible area, then something like this might be acceptable. So again, this is just simply a block that would be shaped around the trim area instead of cutting the trim. So something like this. And of course, that would cover up this area here if you don't want to cut the trim. And I understand some people don't want to cut the trim, but at the same time, it might be difficult for them to create a shaped block like this if you don't have the right tools. Next up on the list, let's go ahead and attach something to the bottom of the door. And that's simply going to be another shaped piece of lumber. And sometimes you're going to be able to use screws to attach this to the bottom of the door. And sometimes you will need to use adhesive depending upon your door. For example, if you have a solid core door, something that is solid wood, then this won't be a problem. However, if you have a hollow core door, it could be a problem. And if that's the case, you might need to plane a layer of paint, if there is any paint, off of the bottom of the door, and then use some type of an adhesive to attach the trim to the bottom of the door. And again, take a look at everything that we have here, because if this doesn't look good, then I would advise going back to our first example where you're going to remove and lower the door, or remove and replace everything, the door included. However, don't forget to finish watching the rest of the video because you might find another idea, like adding a piece of trim to the front of the door. Now, it doesn't need to be this thick, and it can always be decorative trim to where it shapes something like your floor trim, and of course it can be smaller or longer. However, you need to make sure that whatever you put on isn't going to create a problem when you open and close the door. Or in other words, isn't going to be hitting the trim or allowing you to open the door all the way, which means you might need to cut an angle on it like we have here, or make it a little shorter on the end. So on this side here, it might not need to be shorter, but on the other side, it is going to need to be shorter. Otherwise, when you go to shut it, it's going to hit the door jamb. So on this side of the door, it's going to need to be shorter the width of this part of the door jamb. Otherwise, the door won't be able to shut all the way. So a little bit shorter, maybe 1/8 of an inch on both ends. Otherwise, like I said, you're not going to be able to shut the door. And hopefully that makes sense there. Again, kind of saving you a few problems that you could run into if you're not thinking about this and you want to add some type of a trim to the bottom of the door. Next up, let's go ahead and add a shaped piece of lumber on the bottom. And this would be a piece of lumber that would kind of notch around the door. However, again, this method right here is going to require a little more tools and a lot more work. So just another idea. And again, we are leaving a gap here so that we're not going to hit the door jamb on the inside. Another idea would be to install some type of a panel over this area. And again, you could always install some type of trim around it. And you could always use a piece of metal that's sold specifically for doors. And what this piece of metal is usually going to be found under will be some type of a kick plate for the door. And you might see something like this installed in an area where people are in wheelchairs and use their feet to push open the doors. And in my last example, you can always get a door bottom extender. And these come in a variety of different designs, shapes, and lengths, and usually attach with screws to the door and are often thin enough to where you don't need to notch around the door jamb. However, that's going to depend upon your door jamb or whether or not any of these ideas are going to work for you. Now, don't forget, you can get creative. You can use a combination of these. And when it comes to trim ideas, they are all over the internet. So check out some of the other ideas that might make your door and your floor trim look a little nicer than it currently does. In this video, I will provide you with a couple of different methods you can use to put a nosing on a set of concrete stairs. And I believe in most of the videos I've made, I have not provided any nosing because most of the forms usually look something like this. However, that will not be the case in this video. And I've got to say that these methods are probably among the cheapest methods you can use to create some type of a nosing by simply using a few 1x6s or 1x4s. And that can be done by using a few boards like these. Here we have a 1x6, and you will simply attach it with screws or nails to the riser form board. And you can see here where after we pour the concrete, we're going to have a nosing. And in our first example, the nosing is going to be 2 inches tall. However, that's not always going to provide you with the best structural support, especially if you're using a wider board. Instead of a 1x4, you might use something that's 1 inch or 1 1/4 inches. And even though I think the 2 inches is going to be fine, I know the 4 inches is going to be a little bit better. However, I will leave that up to you. I am the messenger, and it is my job to provide you with the methods. It will be your job to figure out which one of these you want to use. And the bottom two are among my favorite. This is actually my favorite here. because it's going to provide a nice decorative detail and plenty of support for our nosing. And of course, this won't be too difficult to do. You will simply cut a 45-degree angle, the length of the board you're going to use to create the nosing, and again, hopefully not too difficult, and of course what it looks like after we have removed the form board. So here we have a 2-inch tall by 3/4 inch nosing. Down here we have 4 inches by 3/4 of an inch. And if you want yours to be a little bit bigger, just use a larger board instead of a 1x4. And of course the 45-degree angle, and the height here should still be 2 inches. And of course the last one, and probably my favorite, would be this one, because it's going to provide you with plenty of concrete for structural support. Even though I'm not about to suggest this one won't be strong, it's just not difficult to tell that this one here and this one here is going to be a little stronger because it's wider. And there you have it, some extremely easy methods you can use to create a nice looking nosing on your next set of concrete stairs. Here is a video that one of our viewers was having a problem with, dealing with a plumbing pipe that was located outside of the wall framing that was going to be used for back-to-back bathrooms, or a bathroom on one side and a bathroom on the other side. And I will go into a little more detail about that here in a little bit, but first I want to provide you with an example of a plumbing pipe that might not be located in an exterior wall correctly. And of course this one here is located correctly. However, if it was outside of the wall and you could cover it with some type of a cabinet or even a small box, for example a small box that might be about 12 inches tall, 12 inches wide, and about 2 or 3 inches protruding from the wall to cover up the plumbing if you need to. And of course this is the first example that you might be able to use to solve your problem if you have a plumbing pipe located outside of the wall and you don't have anything located on the other side. For example, we don't need to move this wall in an inch or two when we could simply build some type of a protective box around it and then cover it with drywall, and then of course cover it with a cabinet. Or if it's located behind a toilet, you might be able to cover the area to where no one's ever going to see it or notice it. However, that is probably not going to be the case if you have back-to-back toilets located the exact same distance away from the vent pipe. And the toilets are going to be the main focus here and not the sink or the bathtub drains. However, this is not going to eliminate the installation of the toilet or the bathtubs if, for example, you choose to fur out the wall instead of moving it. So in this example here, we have everything located exactly where it needs to be. However, in this example, I went ahead and moved the plumbing pipe about an inch out of the wall, and with it the toilet flange and drain pipe plumbing for both toilets, along with the rest of the plumbing for both bathrooms. And of course you can see here where the plumbing pipe is not sticking out on this side. However, it was sticking out on the other side. And the problem the individual is dealing with was the layout of the wall framing and not an existing house. If you have an existing house, you're probably going to have problems that have already been fixed somehow. Whether they've been fixed correctly or not might not apply to this video. So here we have a situation where the builder has not framed all of the walls, and during the layout process notice that one of the plumbing pipes was going to be sticking out of the wall on one side of the bathroom, and this was the situation that one of our viewers was dealing with. However, I needed to make this video to make my point, and that is that you can simply move a few walls. You're not just going to move this wall here because it's going to create problems for either side of the bathroom. However, it will be up to you you to figure out which walls you can or cannot move. For example, we're not going to have a problem moving these walls because we're just going to make the master bedroom closet 1 inch smaller and this bedroom 1 inch longer. However, it could create problems for our hallway and even our forced air heating and cooling unit. So these are things you are going to need to figure out before, of course, and not after. So I'm going to choose to move these walls here. And like I said, make this bedroom a little wider and this closet a little smaller. However, I am not going to affect the hallway. So let's go ahead and move each one of these walls 1 inch to this side to fix everything that we are dealing with. Now, I would also like to point out that it wouldn't be a bad idea to check the rest of the plumbing. Check the distance between the center of the toilet flange and the face of the wall framing. It should be about 12 3/4 inches because they usually need to be located 12 inches away from the finished wall. Then check to make sure that you're not going to have a problem connecting either one of the bathtubs or either one of the sinks. And the reason why I'm saying that is because sometimes when you have a problem like this, you might be dealing with an inexperienced plumber or someone who might have created a problem with the location of the toilets even after you've moved the walls. And hopefully that makes sense. Been there before. So here you can see where we left this wall, and these walls in place and haven't affected the width of the hallways. However, have affected these areas here and then not the bathrooms because we fixed everything there. And then of course this area here and then the width of these rooms. So this is what it would look like after you have fixed the plumbing problem. However, I could not have ended this video without providing you with an example of what it would have looked like if you left all of the walls alone and chose to just fur out one of the walls. And trust me, I've been here before. I've had to deal with this nightmare. And you're usually going to end up with enough room to install the bathtub on one side. However, you're not going to end up with enough room to install it on the other side. And of course, I've seen this problem solved by not furring out the area where the tub is going to be installed and simply stopping it at the edge of the tub or back a little bit. So something like this usually won't be the end of the world if you left everything alone and chose to fur out the walls. Next up on the list will be the toilet flange location. And here you can see where we have 1 foot 1 inch on this side after we furred out the wall and enough room to install our toilet. However, on the other side we don't, because after we install our drywall we're going to have about 11 1/4 inches. And even this isn't the end of the world because you can buy a toilet that will fit in this area. And I actually wasn't aware of this until I made a video probably about 10 or 15 videos ago where someone pointed out that you could buy toilets that will fit in a 10-inch space or a 10-inch distance between the center of the toilet and the finished wall covering. That's usually going to be drywall. So in this video, I am going to provide you with the plumbing parts or names of all of the fittings for our 2-story home addition project in hopes that you will have a better understanding of what you might need to use and not get confused. And keep in mind that even though I am providing you with the information here, that some of these parts might have different names. And again, I've in the construction industry, names change. And one of those examples would be on the West Coast where I live and on the East Coast and then in other countries. So in this example here, I am going to provide you with a manufacturer that has been around for a long time, and I will put the manufacturer's name along with a little more information about these parts in the video description box. And think that that will provide you with a better idea instead of just whipping off names from large home improvement companies or plumbing supply warehouses who might change their names or product information in the future. And I would imagine that you will be able to type the information I'm providing you with into your favorite search engine to find the parts at that company or to find similar parts that would have different names at local home improvement centers or plumbing supply warehouses. And in our example here, I am using ABS, and I don't think the names are going to change that much between cast iron or PVC if that's what you're going to use for this project also. So in this section here, we have the master bedroom sink, the master bedroom shower, and the master bedroom toilet. And this section here would be in the upper section of the entryway closet. And I will also put a link here to the other video and videos that I have made for this project. So again, coming up to the sink here with a clean out, and then a reducing T where we're coming up 2 inches but out 1.5 inches and out 1.5 inches. And then of course all of this is 2 inches along with a 2-inch clean out. Next up, let's pan out so that we can give you an idea where we were and then where we are going. So next up, let's go ahead and tackle this area here and get started over here at the bottom, where we will be connecting into the main drain line, going to the sewer or to a septic tank. And here we have a couple of fittings that were used to offset the pipe. And in the other video, I mentioned that those fittings could be eliminated if the pipe was laid out correctly. So here we have a combo fitting reducing from 3 inches to 1.5 inches, and then a 90 running up to the toilet, along with a couple of fittings to turn the pipes. And now let's go ahead and head over to the bathtub, where we will be using all 1.5 inch pipe along with an 1.5 inch trap. And of course another fitting here to turn the trap and get it going in the right direction. And if your project requires another bend instead of a 22-degree one here, you can always put in a 45 bend, or you could always put together a 45-degree and a 22-degree to make it work if you have enough room. And of course this is our vent pipe going up to our clean out. And then, of course, we have another clean out, except this one here has a slot in it, where the other one had a protruding square that you could put a wrench on. And then our vent pipe, this is 2 inch coming down. And let's not forget that this is also going to be used as our wet vent, coming down to our toilet line. And even though I'm not showing it here, because this is all 3 inch pipe, you can always install a 3 inch to a 4 inch reducing bend that will provide you with a little more volume for the toilet drainage water. And that's actually what I used on the project. I just didn't put it in here because the fitting is a little difficult for me to design. And hopefully this video helps, because we are coming to the end. And in this video, I will be providing you with an example of what can happen if the California fill line is not located in the correct spot. And it's easy to mess this line up. I know it's hard to even imagine, but I've done it myself. And I will also provide you with a method that you can use to fix it. So to start the video, let's go ahead and show you what it would look like if the line is located in the correct spot and all of the fill rafters are dying into it. And I'm also going to provide you with an arrow to give us some type of reference to the line that we know is located in the right spot. So let's go ahead and move it over 1 inch at the bottom, and we will leave it the same at the top, because usually what happens here is we set our gable rafters and then level the ridge, and most of the time it doesn't matter if this is off a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 inches even. However, down here at the bottom it will make a difference, and you can see here where we have moved the rafters and have them dying into the new line that we have created on the sheathing. And the first thing you need to be aware of will be the fact that it will not line up with the gable roof rafter. And this is actually a problem that someone recently emailed me. And in order to fix it, I suggested that they simply relocate the line, pull it in a little bit. However, they could have also done this, and that would simply be to relocate the last rafter, or this rafter here, by raising it at the bottom to straighten everything out. And you can see here where the straight edges are lining up. And another thing you're going to end up with if you don't don't fix this problem will be a hump in the roof or a raised spot. And believe it or not, this was also something that was mentioned a few days ago in one of the comments by a roofer, I'm guessing. And let's not forget that by raising this up, we're also going to be creating a gap in the seat cut here. And if that's going to be a problem, then you will need to cut the top of the rafter to pull it forward. Next up, let's go ahead and install the fascia board, and I'm going to provide you with an example of what everything would look like if I left the length of the rafter overhang the same as the overhang on this side here. So for example, if this had a 2-foot overhang and this had a 2-foot overhang going in both directions, then this is what it would look like. The rafter over here would be up a little higher and would not be blending in and might not be something you're going to want on your property. However, all of that can be fixed by simply extending the length of the roof rafter a little bit and placing the fascia board exactly where it needs to be so that the bottom and top of the fascia board dies in nice and straight. So a simple problem to solve, and of course if the line is located in the wrong spot going in the opposite direction, then all you're going to need to do will be to reduce the length of the fascia board instead of increase it. And in our last example, I will go ahead and extend this a little further and reduce the slope or pitch of the roof rafters while still having them die into the line here for the valley, to provide you with something else you could run into, or even a method you could use to change the design of the roof so that you can have 2 different pitches, or something else that will provide you with a longer overhang in one section of the building. However, before I fix the fascia board, I wanted to give you an idea of what the fascia board would look like if I didn't change the angle and left it over here, the one that would die into this line here, so that you won't be confused and think that the rafters and fascia board will have the same cuts. And when you're doing something like this, you might need to lay out new roof rafters or extend the height of the lower wall. And let's not forget that the upper plumb cuts on the rafter, or vertically level cuts, when assembled, might need to be recut or adjusted. And of course, here you can see where the slope is going to be a little lower here and a little steeper here. And of course, the overhang is going to be a lot longer. In this video, we will take a look at the roof framing for our 2-story home addition. And for those of you who might have noticed, we are missing the bottom of the building. And that's because my computer or my modeling program here goes a little too slow. So I went ahead and removed it, and I will put it back in the future, and I might have to deal with it in a different way when I work on this section here where I tie it into the existing house, where I connect the roof framing and the stairwell to the existing building. So here you can see we are using double hips, and they are going to be 2x8s in our models, 2x6 rafters, 2x8 fascia board, and 2x6 ceiling joist. You might need to use different boards, and remember, I can't provide you with that information for your area because it might be different. You might be dealing with snow loads. And if you notice, I changed this to a 2x4 and then notched it. I notched around the bottom of the hip, and this area can be framed a little different, but this is how I chose to frame it. And I will be doing another video to provide you with a little more information about the different types of bracing that we can use to add additional strength to our roof framing. And one of those will be to add a ceiling joist stiffener that you can toenail into the joist on each side. And of course, I went ahead and notched this. On the other side, I didn't, but on this one here, I extended it a little further because we are going to be nailing this into one of the roof rafters. So here we have the ceiling joist, 16 inches on center, and they are lapping over these load-bearing walls. And if you remember, we have double joists underneath these walls to help with the load transfer. Remember, these are going to be load-bearing walls since they have the ceiling joist sitting on top of them. And if you notice here, we did not lap the ceiling joists. We butt them over the wall, and we're going going to install some straps so that we can get a nice solid rafter tie connection. And you will also need to block these joints over the walls. And you will also need to install backing for the drywall. That's what we have here. And right here we're using a 2x4 instead of a 2x6 because the ceiling joist is providing us with backing on one side. So we don't need to use a 2x6 that will provide us with ceiling corner backing on both sides. And if you need a crawl space into the attic, then you're going to need to frame one out. And I believe the minimum is 22.5 inches by 22.5 inches. However, we made ours a little larger. And since the 2x6 will be the backing for the hallway ceiling, we can go ahead and install some 2x4 blocks for the bedroom ceiling. And then we can do that on this side, but we're going to need backing on both sides of this wall. So we're going to use our 2x6 again, and we will need to notch the ends of the 2x6 where they hit the roof rafter. Otherwise it would be sticking into the roof sheathing. And again, another brace here, and you can always make these braces larger if you need to. And let's take a look at our strap. We will need a strap every 4 feet or every third joist to provide us with a rafter tie 48 inches on center. And these straps can be installed on each one of the joists if you want to, or even 32 inches on center every other joist. And here we have a view of what it might take to nail the 2x6 to the top of the wall framing, along with some type of a block to prevent the wall from moving. And these blocks can be installed throughout the project or in any other place where you think the wall needs a little more support. And this is the ceiling area above the shower in the master bathroom. And here we have more drywall backing. And hopefully by now some of this ceiling joist framing is starting to make sense, because now it's time to set our hip rafters and our ridge. And since this is more about the design than the assembly, I'm not going to be providing you with step-by-step instructions on how to assemble the framing. However, I do have other videos that will provide you with that information. You can always go to the website and check that out. And again, you can see why we notched the 2x4 around the hip. And you could have used a 2x6 and notched the 2x6 underneath the hip also, if I didn't already mention that. And an example of how you can join the double hip rafters to a single ridge, and the fact that you might need to shave a little bit off of the top of the ridge here so that the sheathing won't have a big bump in it. And in my modeling, it's usually easier to find. However, I've seen plenty of people mess that up in the field. So don't be one of them. Next up, let's go ahead and install our roof rafters. And we're going to install the roof rafters before we install all of our fill rafters or our jack rafters. And in some cases, you're going to install the roof rafters and the ridge before you install the hip rafters. And that's how I would have done it. Our blocking for our roof rafters that are 16 inches on center, along with our fill rafters. And we have a 2-foot overhang for our fascia board. And if everything is cut correctly, it should blend in perfectly to provide you with a nice flat surface for your roof sheathing. And then of course your shingles. And then another view of the corner here. And now let's go ahead and head over to the other side to where I went ahead and installed all of the roof rafter fill for that. And of course the upper cut here for this rafter, if you want it to die into the center, it is going to need a 45-degree angle here, and that will be the angle of your hip rafters also. And here you can see where everything is planing in nice and straight. Same on the other side. And of course that's super easy to do with computer generated modeling. However, on the job it might not be that easy. And here's an example of how the ceiling backing support brace will connect to the roof rafter. You will simply nail the brace into the roof rafter, and you can always nail from both sides if you want a little more support. And a view of our ceiling backing blocks. And another view of the support brace, usually located in the middle of the room. And our notch for the ceiling joist, and the 2x4 is going to have to get cut here at an angle when it joins the hip. Another view from there. And here's what it would look like if we center a rafter in here. So with this, we don't have 16-inch on center spacing going all the way across, which means our sheathing will need to be cut to fit. And with the price of sheathing, you might not want to do it this way. You might want to take a little more time during the design phase to figure out what's going to work better. And here's another problem. We have 16 inches on center going this way and 16 inches on center going this way. However, the distance between these two rafters could be a problem for our roof sheathing. And with 16-inch on center rafters and this small of a gap, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. And again, I'll put the fascia board on here so you can see the area right here where the roof is going to extend down a little further so that we can cover the stairwell opening and tie the new home addition into the existing home addition. And here we have a view of our fascia board cut right on the money here. And again, that's not easy to do when you're hanging off of the side of a building. Now I say that, however, today it looks like we have scaffolding on everything. However, when I built this roof here, I had to actually cut it from above, and it wasn't an easy cut to make. In this video, we will be going over the rough plumbing, and that will be the waste only for our 2-story home addition. And if I get more than 20 comments in the comment area for viewers who want to see the water supply system, then I will make another video for that. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started by checking out the vents that are going to be coming through the attic and then through the roof for our master bedroom here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other bathroom on the other side, where we will have a sink, toilet, and a bathtub drain. And even though I won't be showing you in this video, this vent here could always 90 and then tie into this vent here to eliminate another point penetrating through the roof. So let's go ahead and take a look at the plumbing above the floor sheathing here, where we will be using a wet vent on this side to pick up our sink drain. And of course, we will need to install some clean outs. And I wanted to provide you with 2 different examples here of a clean out, where this one here has this type of a design that will also protrude out of the wall, where the other design with the slot in it won't, providing you with another option for which clean outs you might want to install in your house. And of course, I like to have my clean outs a little higher than the drain water that could be trapped in the plumbing pipes above it or in the toilet, sink, or bathtub from coming out of the clean out when it's opened. Meaning that if I put this lower and I opened it up from the other room, I could end up with some water spilling onto the flooring in that room. And if I turned this one around, it would be behind the toilet. However, I could always lower it to where it would still be behind the toilet but accessible from the bathroom. So another thing to think about when you're doing your plumbing. And then our toilet and our bathtub drain with the vent for the bathtub and the vent here for the toilet and the sink. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at the master bathroom, where we have a toilet, shower, and a sink. And for those of you wondering why we're not centering this in this area, that's because the cabinet here is going to have a sink over here, and then there will be a separate area here for a makeup table. And if you look at the plumbing, you wouldn't have a difficult time putting 2 sinks on that drain line. And of course, our shower and the vent here for the shower, and that vent will also be used for the toilet, along with the clean out that will be used for the end of the drain line here. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at the sink. And for those of you wondering just what in the heck's going on here, well, I had to have the drain come out this way because there's a structural load-bearing beam underneath this wall, and the cabinet will cover all of this up. And that's one of the reasons why I'm using this type of a clean out also, because it is going to be located inside the cabinet. And I just wanted to provide you with another view of the fact that we need to keep our plumbing pipes inside of the wall framing. And if you have larger pipes that are not going to fit in the wall framing, then you might want to use wider walls or plan on furring them out with furring strips. Now here's something else that I did on this project. I went ahead and I dropped the plumbing into the closet here to eliminate some of the framing problems I might have had otherwise. And I believe I had to drop the ceiling about 12 inches to make all of this work. So if you don't want to do that, then plan on cutting up all of the framing plates and drilling a lot of holes through your joist or redesigning the plumbing system. So here's another view of it from the bottom side where we have the sink draining into this line here, shower draining into this line, and then the toilet draining in and down through this line. And feel free to chime in if you're a plumber or somebody who might have a better idea on how this design might be more effective, both for the framing and the plumbing. Feel free to leave those comments in the comment area, or if you have any pictures or designs, then you can email those to me also. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at something I had to do here because I didn't locate this pipe in the right spot. Now, if I would have taken a little more time when I was doing my design work for the building foundation plumbing, I could have moved this pipe over a little bit and then got rid of this fitting and this fitting. However, at the same time, this also provides you with another way to solve a problem if you didn't do that correctly. And of course, another view from below of how the toilet and the shower drain is connecting. And this is all 3-inch pipe here, and this is 2-inch. And the sink line is even 2-inch. I like to run 2-inch drains for my sinks because it's usually not going to cost that much more money. Next up, let's go ahead and remove the floor joist so we can get a better look at this. And kind of just go around here. And these are 45-degree fittings here, along with what I refer to as a Santee clean out. And here you can see where we have plenty of drop for the toilet, where we're not going to have that in the other bathroom. And since this is at a 45-degree angle, all I needed to do was rotate this combo fitting 45 degrees to make all of this work. And of course, I did the same thing over here. Another view of the trap there. Just kind of providing you with some different views here in case I forget something. So again, coming out here, coming up 45 and then a 90 here that will be rotated to a 45-degree angle. And this is all 2-inch from here down, 1.5 inch out, 1.5 inch up through the vent. And another view of it here. And get a view from the top. And now let's go ahead and head over to the other bathroom to where we can take a look at our vents coming down for the bathtub and the vent coming down for the toilet, and of course the wet vent section here for the sink, and then how it all ties in there, and then how it all ties into here. Another view. Now, I wanted to provide you with a view of what it might take to make all of this work and fit into a small framing bay. Remember, these are 12-inch on center joist, providing us with a 10.5-inch wide bay. Yet, if designed correctly, will provide us with enough room to make all of this work. And hopefully by now you're getting a pretty good idea how to assemble the plumbing for a project like this. And let's keep in mind that the vents cannot be horizontal. They need to be angled. And since I couldn't find any building code reference numbers on that subject, I would suggest sloping it at a minimum of the 1/4 inch per foot slope that you use for the drainage pipes. However, you might want to check with your local building department or a plumbing contractor in your area for more information. And again, planning is the key to making all of this stuff work. And for those of you who haven't watched the floor framing video, I believe that's where I had to move the joist over a little bit to make everything work for the plumbing drain pipes. And you can see how all of that is coming together and make a little more sense out of the reason why I did what I did when laying out the floor joist and even positioning the plumbing pipes in the building foundation And again, if I would have moved this one over a little bit, I wouldn't have needed to use these couplings. And I think you can see that from here because I have a nice straight line here going all the way to the toilet. So if I would have just taken the center line of the toilet and created the same dimension off of the front of the building here, then I wouldn't have needed to use this coupling. And who knows, by the time you're watching this video 5 or 6 years from now, these couplings could be $250,000 with the price of building materials going through the roof like they are today. In this video, I'm going to provide you with another example of how you can build this type of stairway with a riser on it instead of the open tread design. Now, I already showed you how to build this in a previous video, and I will put a link in the video and try to put one in the video description area also to show you how to build the stairway with this type of structural design. Now, the new design that I am going to provide you with will help out with this area, or the wider space or span between a couple of the stringers that we have here. And basically we have 3 bays, this one, and this one here. However, to build this, I want to point out that you will need to move all of the bottom framing plates back 1.5 inches and cut 1.5 inches off of all of the stringers, all of them, to make this design work. And don't worry about it if you don't do it. The only difference will be that you'll need to add another riser at the top instead of using the rim joist on the deck. So that's going to look something like this when we move it all back and then put our risers on. And since I alternated the cuts, you'll end up with part of the riser extending past the stringer and a couple of other sections that will be even with the edge of the stringer where the riser will come past and stop at the front edge of the riser here. So not too difficult, and you can see here where the cantilevered section will help to provide a little extra structural support to this stringer and this stringer here, and then this one here to this stringer here. And I would like to say to this stringer here, but this one's sitting on top of the framing plates. So this riser going in both directions really won't make that much of a difference. However, it will up here, and it will also provide us with a little more nailing, or if you're going to use screws, or you could even bolt the riser to the stringer to provide us with a little more support. And since we're alternating the risers, this one here will come past to the front of this riser, and then this one here will stop, and then this one will come past. And I'm just doing this to provide you with another method. You could have all of the risers look like this corner here, or all of them look like this corner here, or even miter them. And you will need to check with your local building department to see what the building codes are in your area as to whether or not you need to add a riser, because some building codes do not allow a maximum of a 4-inch space, which at the very minimum might require you to put a 2x4 here and redesign the stairway to make that work. And if we take a look at the treads, you can see where the treads are sitting on top of this section, and then these treads stop, and then the next ones will sit on top of this section, and that pattern will alternate all the way down and end up looking something like this. And again, for those of you who are interested in building a stairway like this, make sure that you check out some of our other videos in the stair design section at the website to make sure that this is the pattern you want to use instead of some of our other innovative designs that you might be the first one to actually build. In this video, I will be providing you with a little more information about wet venting. And a wet vent is nothing more than a section of the vent that will be used for wastewater drainage. And the most common place you're going to find this will be for a toilet vent that allows the bathroom sink drain to connect to it. And that's exactly what we have here. However, we are not going to use it for the bathtub or the wash machine or the kitchen sink. So let's go ahead and take a look at the kitchen sink vent and drain. So the vent pipe is here, vent stops here, because wastewater is not going to be entering into it. The waste is going to go through this down here and then down to the sewer. And most of the time a wet vent is not going to be used for a single fixture where you have a single fixture with a single vent pipe. It's usually going to need another fixture like the bathroom sink draining into the vent for the toilet, if that helps a little bit. So we have the drain for the toilet going into the drain pipes, along with the bathtub drain here. The vent is going to be the section of the plumbing that does not get any drainage water through it. Unless there is a clog somewhere, then that will be a different story. So the section of the vent pipe that is going to be used for the drain is where the wet vent is going to be used, as the drainage water from the sink enters into the vent for the toilet and then goes into the drainage system to the sewer. And I went ahead and changed the colors of the vent pipes to make it a little easier. So again, single fixture, single vent pipe, probably not going to need a wet vent. And again, the drainage pipe won't always be running horizontal. It can run vertical. And by now, I think I've said that enough. I should have hammered it home. And you should have a pretty good idea what a wet vent is, or at least the difference between a wet vent and a vent. In this video, I will be providing you with some fence design and planning tips, or in other words, things you should consider before building the fence. And the first thing on the list will be the property lines, because the last thing you want to do is have your fence located in a spot where you're going to give your neighbor some more land, or they're going to take some land from you. And what we're looking at here is a simple plot plan, and this will provide you with the borders of your property. However, in some cases, if those lines get a little crazy, then you might need to contact a surveyor to provide you with the exact location. Next up on the list, and this will depend upon your property, will be to figure out if there are any underground utility lines that could create problems for you locating your fence posts. And this will be a bigger problem if you're drilling 2, 3, or 4 foot holes into the ground to avoid problems with the ground freezing that could push your fence posts up and damage the fence. And even though they might be able to tell you where the water and the sewer lines are located, they might not be able to do that on older homes. And to find these lines, most of the time you call Dig Alert, and their phone number can usually be found on the internet, and they will mark these utility lines with paint or chalk. And keep in mind that these lines could be off a little bit. So if you have a paint line coming down here and a fence post that needs to be right here, and you're going to use power equipment, then you're probably going to think twice and need to hand dig this area, and if necessary, relocate the post. And here's an example of where it could be a problem if you have the lines running through the area where you're going to install the new fence. The next thing you're going to need to be aware of will be whether or not you need any building permits. And most of the time you don't need a building permit to build a 6-foot tall wood fence. However, if you're going to build one 6 foot and 4 inches and your neighbor complains about it, guess what? You could have a problem with your local building inspector. Next up on the list, and this is another biggie, is whether or not you're going to be able to build a fence that's going to be as straight as you need it to be, because the ground in your yard isn't flat and you might have some low spots in it, and these low spots might need to be filled. Or you can build a fence that matches the terrain, but in some cases the terrain will actually need to work with the fence. So something like this doesn't look that bad. However, if you have some property that has too many variations in the soil, then you might need to get some heavy equipment in there and flatten out the yard. And of course that fence might end up looking something like this with a slight slope to it. However, the top of the fence would be nice and straight, or something like this, where the top of the fence is level and steps down at every post. However, this design right here will create gaps at the bottom of the fence that might need to be filled, and it's going to be a lot better for you to figure this out before the fence is built and not after. And next up on the list will be privacy, because I've built a lot of fences where the people complained about the gaps in between the fences or any other gaps because for whatever reason they could not wrap their mind around the fact that lumber shrinks. And I will put a link here to a playlist that will provide you with a few different designs if you're looking for privacy. Next, try to figure out what type of wood you're going to use, because sometimes the cheapest lumber isn't going to provide you with the best value, and this would include considering pressure treated posts or even the 2x railing for the bottom and top rails that the fencing boards attach to. Which would lead me to the next question. You're going to need to try and figure out what the fence is going to look like in 5 or 10 years, because this seems to be another problem people have who somehow think that a particular fence with a certain type of lumber or other types of building materials won't fade, discolor, or leave you, the homeowner, a little unhappy a few years down the road. And this next one might not seem like that big of a deal to people who don't own any pets. However, for those of you who do own pets, this could be a problem. So make sure that these pets are placed in an area that will not be creating problems for the fence builders. Next up on the list would be any additional materials or labor that might be required for whatever reason, and both neighbors might not agree that it would be their responsibility or that it would have anything to do with building the fence. For example, here's a situation where metal needed to be added to the bottom of the fence because this neighbor on this side has raised the back part of their yard. And this tip could apply to a wide variety of different problems, like leveling out the property or regrading it just so the fence could be built. Which would lead us to our next problem, and that would be any trees, plants, or shrubbery that is growing next to the fence, or like this plant here, could be in the way of putting the fencing on the other side. Now, I wouldn't have brought this one up here if I didn't have a story to tell, because I remember one time a neighbor complaining about a plant that was on his property when it was actually on his neighbor's property because the fence wasn't located in the right spot. For example, this bush right here might look like it belongs to this neighbor here. However, if the property line is over here, because the fence was built in the wrong spot, then this neighbor here could actually complain and suggest that this plant, even though they planted it, isn't going to be their responsibility and instead will be the neighbor over here's responsibility, all because the fence wasn't located in the right spot. And for our last tip in this video, even though these are not going to be all the problems you could run into, and with that said, feel free to leave any stories or problems you ran into when planning or designing a wood fence in the video comment area for everyone to see and learn from. And even though I have been mentioning this tip throughout the video, I saved what I would consider to be the most difficult tip for some neighbors. And that's going to be getting paid from your neighbor or somehow agreeing to a method of payment that is going to be fair for both neighbors. And if you remember from the title of this video, it's all about planning and designing. And I wouldn't start this project at all until you know who's going to be chipping in and when you're going to get paid, or when you are responsible for paying someone else to build or rebuild a fence on your property. So with that said, let's go ahead and wrap the video up, and I will be putting links to other videos as I make them throughout the videos and in the video description box.